Greetings, reality sandwich community. Kyle here back with another deep dive. Share your experience. Joined today by the wonderful Michael. Michael, thank you for spending time with me today.
Yeah, of course. What's up, man?
I'm doing excellent. If you wouldn't mind, could you give us a brief introduction to yourself to our community tuning in?
Okay. I don't know what the context we're going for is, but I'll just start with like how I ended up on Reality Sandwich
Sure.
on this.
Yeah, give
So
us
how I
your
met
name,
you.
a little bit about what you do, and how you took your first step into the psychedelic realm here.
Yeah, I've been a firefighter for 14 years. I'm in Southern California, and I've known about the psychedelic research since 2016 when that was when MAPS got the phase 3 trial designation, the breakthrough therapy designation for MDMA. And I thought it was super interesting. So I'd been following it for a long time as kind of like an academic observer of what was going on in that field of psychedelic research, but hadn't actually felt the need or tried anything um, as far as like personal experience. And then after I came to Los Angeles in 2017, had already been a firefighter for about 5 years before that on the East Coast. And then another 8 years in Los Angeles. And after about like 10 years or so of being a firefighter, um, I started to just get curious about the psychedelics in more of like a personal way because it was something that I started to feel like I had an issue with, like the things that I'd been seeing at work and the things that have been going on in my personal life. And it was kind of a step that I needed to take for my not only healing but like personal development. I'd say I've always been interested in like more like spiritual stuff and self help type stuff. Listen to a lot of podcasts and read a lot of books. So it was something I'd been really aware of for a long time.
Before we jump in any deeper, especially in the psychedelic space, I believe a lot of the conversation gets directed towards helping veterans. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to dive in about your personal experience and what you've seen and what you hear from colleagues. We're forgetting about our first responders, the firefighters, the EMT workers. Could you talk a little bit about what they're going through, why you
Yeah.
decided to again explore the education around plant medicine?
So we're a little bit different than veterans in the fact that sometimes it's described as like death by 1,000 paper cuts over the course of a 30-year career in your city where you're going to work and seeing kind of the worst things that kind of happen in your city every day for a very long time. So in that sense, we kind of ignore our own mental health because it's just a paper cut, even if we go to like a fatality fire or something like that, things like that don't happen all the time. And the major incidents that I've been to, especially as a newer firefighter, I wouldn't think that they affected me. Um, but over time, I think the biggest thing is that it it's different than if you go to war and you have a big incident where you're blown up and you see your friends get killed or injured and you're involved in that whole thing, one major extreme scenario. But these little scenarios are more in the back of your head, happening slower over the course of a long time. And one thing that I realized so my like psychedelic journey has coincided with my journey of learning about how the human mind works.
Mhm.
And the nervous system is really just a primal. It's based on the things that we see, it's based on patterns, and it's based on habits. So when what we see is constantly a certain type of thing, that's what our worldview becomes like. So I'd use the example of really like if for anybody, your view of the world isn't based on what the world is like. Your view of the world is really based on what you've seen in the world. And if the majority of the things that you've seen in the city that you live and work is gunshots and car accidents and deaths and fires, that slowly becomes the worldview. And for me, I think that was probably my biggest like PTSD symptom, is just the way I saw the world wasn't the same. It was more dark and gray, and the world's not a safe place, and you always got to be careful type of view of the world. And after I started doing more of this work, not just the psychedelics, but really just the spirituality stuff and the psychology stuff, I just realized that that's not accurate. That's not an accurate view of the world, but our behaviors are kind of based off of our view of the world,
Mhm.
if that's making sense.
Yeah, well put. And again, did you always want to be a firefighter growing up? What was your training like? How did you even get into this
I,
career?
I did since I was 16 years old. We had what do they call it? Like an explorer program. And one of my friends told me about it, and I was a 16-year-old kid, and I was like, oh, that sounds cool. We could go to a firehouse and stay there all night and go on calls with them. And so I started as an explorer when I was 16. And all you do is, like, from the time you're 16 to 18 is just do the hydrant for them or the outside work, stuff like that. And then when you turn 18, you get certified on everything else as a volunteer. But that's when I started wanting to do it. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I grew up and got out of high school and everything. Um, Everybody, all the adults in my life always told me you had to go to college if you wanted to be successful or do anything. So my mind as a kid was always thinking about, like, what kind of degree can I get that goes into a field that I could make money or whatever. And then about 2 years into college, it like clicked, and I was like, wait, I could make a living off of doing what I'm already doing as a volunteer. And so that's when I decided I want to be a firefighter full time. But it's kind of it brings up an interesting topic, and there's a guy named James Gearing who talks about this a lot. He's a first responder and veteran mental health advocate. He has a podcast called Behind the Shield. He talks about all kinds of stuff like this, especially in the mental health and the wellness, the biohacking, and all that kind of stuff. But one thing that I learned from him is that most firefighters, and it's probably the same for law enforcement too, but I can't speak for them, but most firefighters do have some kind of childhood trauma, or it's a big generalization, but that seems to be true. And that's what James Gearing talks about. It's an interesting piece of psychology. Like, when somebody grows up with an unstable, chaotic childhood, that's another thing that creates a brain that wants to thrive in that chaos. And the stability of going to an office every day and packing your briefcase and sitting in front of a computer doesn't appeal to someone like that as much, because we thrive in that chaos. My childhood was different. I'm maybe the outlier. My childhood was great. I had awesome parents. I lived in a safe town. Nothing really happened. So for me, that's kind of why I wanted to be a firefighter, is because my childhood was like pretty easy, and
Mhm.
I wanted to see like some real world stuff, not just my little bubble of my nice suburban town. So I was like, oh, I'm going to go be a firefighter. And I wanted to work in the most, rundown, dangerous areas I could. I wanted to work in areas that go to the most fires. And I wanted to see as much stuff as possible. I didn't just want to, some people, they want to be firefighters so they can work in their hometown, or they want to be firefighters so they can work for a department where they'll make a good living and have a pension. But for me and for a lot of other firefighters, they want to work in an area that is busy and they're going to see some action. So as a kid, I didn't really think of the implications on that, how that would kind of affect me over a long enough period of time. But that's why I ended up wanting to work in areas that have a lot of problems.
You mentioned the death by 1,000 paper cuts. Was there a particular moment, or what was the catalyst to make you want to educate yourself about plant medicine and being introspective and maybe healing yourself? And then, what led to that first psychedelic experience?
It was it was a moment where um, it's kind of a bland, like boring moment. It's not a great story to tell, but I was driving on Pacific Coast Highway. It was a nice day. The sun was setting. I had some music on. Um, I didn't have really anything bothering me or wrong. It should have been a good moment, is what I'm getting at. Like, I was driving down. It's a beautiful sunset. It's Pacific Coast Highway. I have my favorite music on, and I was just thinking. This was probably like 2 years ago. It's like a vivid memory, and I was just thinking, like, why am I not enjoying this more? It was like I should have had that feeling you get when it's a nice sunset and you have good music on and you feel like joy and excitement and like life is good, because that's life was good. And I didn't feel that. It was it was just like everything was blunted all the time, and that being a really good day and a really good moment but still feeling kind of blunted is what made me realize, like, maybe there's an issue here. Maybe I need to start thinking about some stuff, because it had been a long time since I really just felt like ease. Like, I didn't have to worry about money. I was married at the time. I was happy with that. Have a nice house, live in a nice area. Like, everything was really good. I'm like, why is this not feel like it should? And the answer goes back to that worldview thing we were talking about earlier. How even though I wasn't at work, I was still carrying that worldview home with me. So I started to do some EMDR therapy. And for those who don't know what that is, it's eye movement reprocessing and desensitization, EMDR. Oh, I switched the D and the R, but it's EMDR. And the way that works is you'd have, like, some therapists have a light that goes back and forth that you follow. A therapist I went to has like two things that you hold in each hand, that this one will vibrate, then this one will vibrate, and it goes back and forth. And then that's to alternately stimulate the left hemisphere, right hemisphere, left, right, as you go through these memories. So we spent a few weeks or maybe a couple months just going over these calls that I never forgot about, like the fatality fires, the car accidents, the hanging shootings, the um, crazy shit hostage calls. There's um, like multiple hostage situations I've been on that were both resulted in fatalities. There was two mass shootings. One of them, there was like 9 people that got shot, and another one, there was 14 people that got shot. So all that stuff I went over with the therapist and told her all these stories. And then when you actually start the EMDR, she gives you the vibrator things for your hands and takes you into what to me seems like hypnosis. She says, close your eyes, you get really relaxed. And she says, go back to that call, bring up the feelings that you had when you were on this call. And she picks one, or I picked one that we just went over. And then you bring up all those feelings that are stored in the body, because trauma is stored in the body. It's the entire nervous system, not just the brain, not just the heart. It's the nervous system. So you bring up that feeling, and now you're processing it, because when you stimulate left, right, that's encouraging the brain to make new neural pathways around this incident. And what happens next is she just says, let your mind wander, see what comes up next. And it was the weirdest thing for me, because it was like the next thing I would see was completely unrelated. It would be like a childhood memory, or it would be like a memory from my high school job when somebody said this to me. And that's because memories in the brain are tied together by central emotional themes, not chronological order, and they're not filed like you would put them in a filing cabinet. So you work down through these systems of memories that are all tied together by a core emotion. And that helps you kind of process and release that stuff that's left in the body. And that worked pretty well for me, but being aware of the psychedelic research, I'm like, holy shit, that's the same thing that they say like psilocybin does, builds new neural connections. You're doing the exact same thing. You're rewiring the brain. You're looking at things from new perspectives, and you're building all these new neural pathways. And I love the analogy of the snow over the trails on the mountain, if you've ever heard that analogy about psychedelics. But it's like your brain has all these neural pathways that are just worn down like paths through the snow. And if you're going to walk in the fresh snow and your snow's up to your knees, it's really hard to get from a point A to a new point. You have to walk in those paths that your brain's been using. So it might be like, I didn't do good enough on that call, or people gave me a lot of shit when I was a rookie, or other things like I'm not good enough, or my whatever these thought patterns are that we're stuck in. Psychedelics is like a fresh coat of snow over all those pathways. So now we have the freedom to take whatever pathway we want. And then after a psychedelic experience, we can do the integration work, which is like, for me, I do a lot of writing. It's writing about that new thought pattern, or meditating on it, or actually going out and practicing in that world. If you say, I'm going to live with more compassion for people that didn't treat me right, and now you have to go out and actually live that, and now you're making that pathway in the snow a habit, and you're kind of breaking out of all those old pathways. So that's why I was interested in psychedelics, because I thought a fresh coat of snow for everything would be pretty nice right now.
Beautiful. So you've done this light therapy. How did you get invited, or how did you, make your first step to that first psychedelic ceremony, or, walk me through the scene now of you doing this for the first time.
So I had no idea like where to go to find a facilitator or anything like that. No idea. But it was through Kambo. If you know it, I'm sure a lot of people that listen to this know what Kambo is. It's peptide secretions from a frog. They burn gates on your arm or somewhere else, and they put those secretions from the frog in there, and it's like a cleanse. It's not psychedelic. You just it makes you throw up
Purge.
and purge,
Yeah.
and it's not pleasant. You get flushed. Your face gets red, swollen, and it feels kind of like a flu that lasts for like 20 minutes until they take it off. And for me, that was cathartic, because I think because the ritual that kind of goes with it, like the belief in like, when you're throwing up, this is the trauma leaving your body. It sounds kind of woo woo, but it's like, if you really believe that there's something going on, the trauma's stored in the body, and then you're imagining it all coming up. That's one way to help your brain kind of get rid of those things that you're storing. And I'm not going to say it's like completely woo woo and it's like actual trauma moving from your leg to your belly and now you're throwing it up. It's psychology. It's how the brain works. And this is another thing I learned that's awesome, is taking something intangible and making it tangible helps the brain process it. So if you're taking something intangible, like this nervous feeling you have because you have social anxiety, that's intangible. You can't touch that, feel that. Well, if you can feel it, but you can't touch it or move it anywhere, or do anything with it because it's inside you. It's intangible. But if you take that and have something tangible that represents that, and now you're doing something with that, it's the purge. It's in a bucket, and you're dumping it into the dirt. You're doing something with something tangible now that represents the intangible, and that helps the brain process it. It's like psychologically. And the same thing with like other rituals, like there's a ritual you can use like a padlock where you have something in your past that you're trying to release that doesn't serve you anymore, some guilt, some resentment. you get a padlock and you hold the padlock and you say, this padlock represents the guilt that's holding me back. And I'm going to unlock this padlock to represent freeing myself from the chains of this guilt that's keeping me tied to the past. And you do that every day for 40 days. And after 40 days, you know it's just a lock. You know it's not, the lock's not doing anything in your body. It's the psychology. You're taking something intangible, you're putting it into something tangible, and then you're unlocking it to free it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can even bring in some gratitude to the lock and say, you know what, I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for the food on my table. I'm grateful for my friends. And I'm going to carry that gratitude with me all day. And then you lock the lock. It's kind of goofy, like spiritual stuff, but there's psychology behind it. It's not like somebody just made it up because they thought it sounded cool on paper. It's psychology. I don't even remember how we transitioned into this ritual. Oh, it was Kambo. We were talking about Kambo. But that's how I found out about psychedelic facilitators. That Kambo and psychedelics often have the same types of people that are interested in self-improvement. And Kambo facilitator kind of had some recommendations for ayahuasca facilitators. And so I went, and ayahuasca was the first thing that I tried. And
Oh, wow.
that was actually a very interesting experience for me. Want me to talk about that?
Yeah, please. So yeah, tell me a little bit about, the Aya ceremony, the Kambo ceremony. So you went, walk me through the scene of you doing that. What was the integration period like after, and then, how did you sign up for this ayahuasca ceremony?
So for the Kambo, I think that was somewhat helpful for me. It wasn't like life changing or anything, but there were three of us that all went to the same Kambo ceremony. We all had different things we were working on. We sat together, got to know each other, drank a lot of water, and there was some kind of ritualistic stuff. We said prayers. We talked to each other about what our intentions were, what we were trying to release, whether it was something emotional or physical or health related. And that's something that helps me, is not just telling my story to other people, but hearing other people's stories too. And the collective energy of the room and the collective healing that happens. And I believe that my energy in the room affects you, and your energy in the room affects other people in the room. And when we all have this intention and we're all in the room together, all of our kind of energies are encouraging each other to heal from whatever we're trying to make right with. And then after that, we did the Kambo. We went up to the practitioner. He burnt the gates on our arms, or wherever I had mine on my arm. So he burned 4 gates, and then cleans them off with like an alcohol swab or something, and then puts the secretions from the frog on there. The Kambo, it's like it comes on a stick, put some water on it to rehydrate it and turn it into like a gel, and then the gel goes on. About 30 seconds later, you just start throwing up like crazy because your belly's full of water from all the water you drank, and you get flushed, you get hot. But then at the end, this particular facilitator did 40 minutes, others do 20 minutes. I think 40 minutes is too long. And when I did 40 minutes, I had a headache for like 2 days, but 20 minutes, I felt great the next day. But as soon as they take it off your arm, you feel better like 5 minutes later. You just feel exhausted, because that's work, like throwing up for 40 minutes straight. And it's just so relieving when it comes off, kind of like getting out of an ice bath. You're like, oh, thank God that's over with. And a lot of people say they feel a lot more peaceful the next day. A lot of emotional benefits, a lot of physical benefits. People talking about healing all kinds of crazy stuff. Traumatic brain injury is a big one that people are having a lot of success if they've had traumatic brain injuries, and they go and do Kambo, and their symptoms get a lot better. So it works pretty well for things like that too. Um, and then I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks later that I went to the ayahuasca ceremony.
Yeah, walk me through that. Who was the facilitator? Where was the setting, and what was your intention? What were you hoping to get out of it? And walk me through the experience.
I don't remember my exact intention, like word for word, but my intention was just to see what's at the center of that onion. Like we were talking about with EMDR, all these different memories come up that are like, wow, I never realized when I was in fifth grade and I didn't get to go on that field trip. It was exactly the same feeling I got um, when I had to transfer out of this fire station, and I didn't realize those things were connected. And you go back, and at some point, there's kind of like a central memory where that behavior started. And when you can piece all that stuff together, you can realize why you're the way you are. And that's a great intention to have for any psychedelic therapy. If anybody's looking for a good intention, is to ask yourself, why am I the way I am? And that's a good way to get to like the center of those emotions. Um, so that was my intention. It was a facilitator here in California, and I didn't go to like Peru or anything, Mexico or all that, because it's really expensive to do that. And that's one of the things that I think is a big debate and also a big issue is not everybody can afford to take a week off of work and fly
Mm-hmm.
to South America or wherever and go sit with an indigenous shaman. And even when they do, sometimes it's a tourist trap. Sometimes it's a big
Mm-hmm.
retreat center that's built for tourists. That's expensive, and it's still not the traditional indigenous way of doing it or ceremony. And I don't think
Mm-hmm.
there's an issue with it being done here. I think that it should be done here. If we're telling people they have to go to South America or Mexico to do it, I think we're limiting a lot of benefits to only a certain group of people. And I think as long as we do it here with respect for the cultures that discovered these things and brought these things to the world, I think it could be well integrated into like our culture, because our culture is not the same as um, Kero culture, the tribe that lives up in Machu Picchu, or
Mm-hmm.
any of these indigenous cultures. We're different here, and it's different to adapt these things to the way our culture is here, as long as we're doing it with respect and understanding that these are traditions that were developed over thousands of years because they work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's the long way of saying I did it here in the U.S., and that's why. Um, and then, so I could talk about like during the ceremony, because that was during the ceremony was probably the most interesting thing. It wasn't pleasant. It wasn't like a light show that it's all love and connection and beauty and all this nice stuff that I was kind of hoping for. It was it was like the battle of 300 for 4 hours. So after the first cup, I felt anxiety. I felt a lot of anxiety, and when I would close my eyes, I could tell exactly what the anxiety was. It wasn't just this ambiguous feeling. It was specific calls that I had been on that were starting to come up. Like the barrier between this subconscious and this conscious was starting to dissolve. And these were EMS calls. These were just regular traffic accidents. This was um, finding homeless people dead in their tents. It was
Mm-hmm.
shootings. It was like violence and stuff I really didn't want to see. And it was uncomfortable. But just just enough that I could fight it and kind of try and avoid it, even though I know that's not the point. Everyone tells you, like, when that stuff comes up, don't push it away. But then when it comes up, it's like, oh, let me push that away. I don't like that. So then when it was time for the second cup, I told the facilitator kind of what was going on, what I was feeling. And she pours the second cup and she's like, just so you know, it's not going to get better after the second cup. It's going to get worse. But she said it in a way that's like, you need the second cup. So I'm like, okay, I got this. Let's go. I had the second cup, and then the barrier went from starting to dissolve to just gone, and all that stuff just came up, and it was like it was not a big like visual experience. I didn't like see all this stuff again. I just felt it all again, and it was every call I had been on and every emotion I felt on all of those calls, but all happening at once. And it was overwhelming, but I was still sober minded enough that I just tried to breathe through it and just let all these emotions come up. And it was stress and fear and um, anxiety and like the feelings as a rookie where you're always like everything you do is like, is somebody gonna give me shit right now? Did I do that wrong? Who saw that? That kind of feeling would come up too. Getting through probation as a firefighter, we give drills for the fire crew. So it's like, this is the chainsaw. It has this much horsepower, and this is the way we use it. And you give a whole presentation on it. But at the same time, everybody in the fire station is sitting there watching you like this, waiting for you to say something wrong so they can make you feel stupid, make you feel like an idiot for it. And it's stressful, like sitting in front of a bunch of people that you kind of aren't even sure if they like you or not because they're just giving you shit. But that started to come up a lot too. And yeah, man, it was overwhelming, but I knew it had to happen. And it was a big eye opener to what it means when they say the body keeps the score. Because I'd read that book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bissell van der Kolk. It's really good. It's about trauma and how the body stores traumatic memories because the memories are fragmented. We can't remember certain details. That's why when you ask 5 different witnesses about an incident, you'll get 5 different stories because the brain doesn't store traumatic memories like other memories. It'll store the smells, it'll store the feelings, it'll store the sounds and stuff like that. Like I think about like this pallet yard fire we went on, and I can hear like the roar of the fire through those pallets. Like it was, that's the type of memory that sticks with me. Not like, who was I with? I have no idea who I was with that day. I don't remember that detail. So trauma memory is weird. But with this ayahuasca experience of this battle of 300, that's what I call it because that's what it felt like. It felt like just like, rah, and it showed me that stuff was inside the body, just like the book says. It's still there. It doesn't go anywhere unless you process it. And if you never want to talk about it and you never want to cry about it and you never want to really feel those emotions, like sometimes you just have to come back from work and sit down and say, that was a fucked up night. And man, that kid's mother is going to go through a really hard day after what happened to her kid last night. And you got to feel those emotions. You got to just let them move. And then you just have to identify where you're feeling that because it's not just a thought, it's in the body. So now it's like, oh, it all makes sense. I can come home from work. I can identify this emotion. I can be with it instead of suppressing it. And I can allow it to do what it needs to do and digest it and give it back to Mother Earth. And then I can move on without storing that stuff anymore. So everything connected between all the books about trauma I'd read and what I was actually feeling during the ayahuasca ceremony. And then I guess it was probably about an hour and a half between each cup. So that war kind of started to end and calm down. And it was like the morning after a storm out in Castaway when he's like out there on the raft and there's a storm. And then the next morning he wakes up. That's what it kind of felt like after about an hour and a half or however long these rounds were. And it was time for the third cup. So I'm like, okay, I think I think the hard part's over with. Let's see what happens after this cup. And then that's when I started getting more like visual stuff. I laid down on my little mattress or my camping mat, whatever I had, and I started just seeing like nice shapes and colors. And I was like, this is a lot nicer than that whole battle of 300. And then, like, all of a sudden, I'm just watching the shapes and I just had a full on ego death. I just forgot who I was, like, and where I was, and if I was dead or alive. And it was, it went from really nice and relaxing all of a sudden to like terrifying, because it felt like I would just like kind of separate from my body and just forget who I am. And that ego death is a really healing experience as well. It was terrifying for me because I never experienced that before. But that teaches you a lot too about the ego versus the true self. The true self is the awareness inside of us. It's the consciousness. It's the part of our psychology that we don't understand anything about, because you can take fMRI images of the brain and EEGs and say, oh, when somebody's feeling stressed, this is what their brain does. Or when somebody's hungry, this is what their brain does. Or when they're having sex, this is what their brain does. But none of that explains how that translates to a subjective experience
Mm-hmm.
of being aware of being hungry or having sex or being angry. So consciousness is that piece that we don't understand. Like, how does a brain that has electrical impulses translate to an actual awareness? So when I say true self, what I'm talking about is the awareness, where you're not attached to those identities that you have, that you've been taught since you were a child. Like, I'm a firefighter. I'm tough. I'm a husband. I have to support my family. I have to, we have all these identities that serve us in a lot of ways. Like, you wouldn't be here doing this interview if you didn't have uh, some level of an identity. You'd just be like some hippie meditating on a mountain. And that's cool too, I guess, but you're not going to accomplish anything like that, really. So we need that. But then the true self is really what we want to like be more aware of and connect with more, and realize that even though those identities serve us, we need to learn how to cooperate with them, and like understand why we do what we do. And does this make sense? Am I getting at?
You're making complete sense, and yes, I'm glad you're getting all this
So
out.
that's why I think like the whole experience of like ego death is important, because you can separate that awareness from those identities and those emotions
Mm-hmm.
too. You're just the awareness that's experiencing those emotions, but they're not necessarily a good or a bad thing. They're just, emotions are just information. Good or bad is a story we tell ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a huge distinction to learning how to rewire the brain. And if I go on this call and I have this bad feeling, bad is just my narrative I'm telling
Mm-hmm.
myself about it. But if I can just see it as information, well, it's telling me something. It's teaching me something, and it doesn't necessarily have to be bad or good. And we can do that about everything. We can do that about like a breakup, or like I went through a divorce last year, and it was like at first it was like, oh, she did this, I was the victim, because it was victim mentality. And you realize like that's a story too. Nobody did anything to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all
Mm-hmm.
she did was live somewhere else. Like, she didn't do anything to me. Like, I'm the one who decided to be depressed for 6 months because of it. That wasn't her telling me not to eat healthy or not to clean my house or mow the lawn. That was me doing that. I couldn't be mad at her because because I was too depressed to clean my house for 2 weeks. That was my
Hmm.
fault. She didn't do anything. She just left. She just moved somewhere else. And when you start seeing things like that, like it's not bad or good. Only the narrative I tell myself is that it's bad. But now I can tell a different narrative to myself,
Hmm.
wow, she taught me so much about relationships, and I got to this point in my life because of her, and um, now I can do better next time, and it's all a learning experience. And um, like maybe she's not the one I was supposed to be with, and the fact that she moved out actually freed me to go find the woman that's my soulmate that I'm meant to be with for the rest. And all these stories we can tell ourselves, and when we understand that all they are is stories, we can start to believe them. And with psychedelics, that's the biggest thing they do that nothing else can do is they can make you believe in the stories you tell yourself. It's one thing. So this is something after a divorce, somebody will tell you, oh, she wasn't the right one for you anyway. Don't worry about it. That doesn't make anyone feel better. But if you believe that she wasn't the right one for you, you're going to feel better. And psychedelics,
Hmm.
that fresh coat of snow, allows you to actually believe these things. And then I hear all these cliches like, you got to just be yourself. Like, that's a cliche everyone says. Like, don't worry about what anybody else says, just be yourself. It's like, okay, I've heard a million people say that, and it's just a cliche. But after some psychedelic journeys, you're like, I feel that in my heart now, that I need to just be myself and stop worrying about what other people think and follow my passions. And that's why I'm here doing this interview, because it's like, who cares what anyone thinks? Uh, And, we're in control of our own lives, and we're in control of our own emotions. And these are all things I just heard before, but I never really believed until after ayahuasca and a couple psilocybin journeys.
Wow, a lot to unpack there. Was my first question is after the ayahuasca ceremony, as I've learned with my own plant medicine experiences and psych. It's not this isn't a magic bullet. You need to do the work afterwards. So, what was your integration like after this first eye ceremony? Did you take up journaling? How were you processing post ceremony and
Yeah, that's
kind of
that's
creating this new
really important.
narrative?
Yeah, because I didn't because I wouldn't have really like settled on any of those new beliefs that I just went on this whole dissertation about if I wasn't doing the integration work. And it's so funny because you hear like everybody say like on all these like psychedelic pages on Instagram, like you got to do the work. Ayahuasca doesn't do the work for you. It assigns the homework, and you hear all this stuff, and it's like, who's going to tell me what the work is? Everybody told me I have to do the work, but who's going to tell me what the work is? And people say like you got to journal and talk about it and stuff like that. Um, but for me, the work, and it's probably different for everybody, but I think journaling is something that everybody should do, because that's another form of taking something intangible and making it tangible. And now it's a piece of paper that you have it written down on. And you're not going to keep going over the same realizations every time you sit down and you think and you try and process your journey. And you're just coming to the same things over. Now you have them written down. So the next time you're up late and you're thinking about your journey and your experiences, now you can bring out your journal. You can build on that entry from the last time. And like for me, this like building on it and building on it and building on it happened like continuously for months.
Mhm.
It's not just like coming out of an ayahuasca ceremony and realizing, I realize you just got to love your neighbor, like Jesus said, just love your neighbor. It's a long process of like, okay, how do I love my neighbor? And then you write about that. It's like, oh, why do I need to love my neighbor? And you can write about that and you build on it and build on it and build on it. And then it's like, wow, I should read this book that talks about this thing that I just. So for me, it was a lot of reading and a lot of writing and a lot of different meditations. Like the meditations that really helped me are a couple of like specific ones. One of them would be like somatic observation, I guess is what I would call it. So you get into a meditation, you follow the breath, you just keep following the breath. And for me, The first couple minutes that I do this, my mind is all over the place, but about 5 minutes in, I get relaxed and my mind just completely settles down. And it's like an amazing feeling to just like let it all go for a minute. And any thought that comes in, and people say, oh, I can't meditate because I can't stop my brain. It's like, that's not the point. You can't really stop your brain. But when your brain starts to go somewhere else, you're aware of it, you observe it, and then you come back to the breath or whatever your central point of focus is. And um, for this type of meditation, that like the somatic awareness, instead of having that breath as your central point of focus, you find an emotion in the body and you make that your central point of emotion. So if it's this knot in your stomach or this lump in your throat or this anxiety in your chest, you say, well, what does that feel like? And you just follow that. And every time your mind wanders, you just come back to that feeling and just follow that feeling for a couple minutes. So that was really helpful for me. And another thing about meditation is like you can't really do it wrong, unless you're arguing with yourself the whole time. When your mind starts to wander, you're like, oh damn, I can't do this. This isn't working. You're like, oh man, I just spent 10 minutes and my mind wandered the whole time. You start to get like angry at yourself, and that's the ego coming back. And just let it go. It's okay. You spent 20 minutes with your mind wandering. That's cool. Who cares? And maybe you'll have better meditation the next time, or a worse one the next time. And it's meditation isn't about judging yourself. It's about just sitting for a few minutes. So that's the somatic observation one. Other ones is, or other meditations are like a few energy practices that I learned from a Caro lineage shaman. It's hard to say, but this is Peruvian tradition or practice where you first imagine the energy field around your body, because everything has an energy field. The galaxies have an energy field, the planet does, the solar system does, your body has an energy field. And the shape of the energy field is called a torus. It's like if you've ever seen like the magnetic, when you put a magnet underneath of like a bunch of metal shavings, you get that lines of magnetic energy. You picture that around the body, and you expand it out. You just sit there and you just focus on this electromagnetic field around the body. And then you imagine energy or like magnetic energy from the cosmos coming down into your head, and you track it through all 7 chakras. So it starts at the crown, then you imagine feeling the energy move into your third eye, your throat, your heart, your stomach, your solar plexus, and then the root. And you let that energy go back to Mother Earth. And that's helpful because it's taking these emotions that get stuck in the body and it's moving them back into the earth. So they say like the earth is magnetic and the sky is electric. That's why we have lightning that comes from the sky to the earth. And you're just imagining being a channel for that electric energy from the sky and bringing it to the earth. So that's another type of meditation that I enjoy. And I think that's 2 meditations that are specifically for like moving emotions and trauma that get stuck. And there's probably as many different forms of meditation as there are people, but those are 2 that I like. So reading, journaling, meditation.
Was your now ex-wife, was she supportive of the psychedelic education journeys and medicine you were taking?
Yeah, she was.
Or do you feel that was one of the breaking points?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a breaking point. I'm trying to, because I don't want to get into her whole journey. But she was supportive of what I was trying to do. And
the follow-up on that is now you've been educated, you're doing this integration, you've had a psychedelic experience. What was the reaction when you wanted to share this with fellow firefighters, your parents? How did you have a community to talk to this about? And what was their, how have you now educated fellow, first responders?
So I'm really, it's really awesome that we have like people like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson and stuff talking about this. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to talk about it with anyone. But most of the time, I don't tell any firefighters about this because most firefighters see it as like drugs. They don't know anything about it. They're like, oh, you're going to do some hippie stuff in South America, or like, what's that? Is that like peyote? And they don't understand. They have no idea that this is helpful. And it's really a shame that they got lumped in a category with other
Mm-hmm.
drugs, because it's the opposite of alcohol and cocaine and opiates, because those things are an escape to separate yourself from the things you carry. Psychedelics, on the other hand, they hurl you headfirst into the shit that you want to avoid. So it's the
Mm-hmm.
complete opposite. And that's a hard thing for somebody to understand that's been told their whole
Mm-hmm.
life that all drugs are the same. And there's no distinction between drugs and medicine. And we call the things that we call our drugs medicine, and we call our medicine drugs. you
Mm-hmm.
know? So there are certain people I can talk to about it because of the pod. They heard it on Joe Rogan or something like that. And um, they're at least aware of it. And I can talk about this with certain people. And then with my family, um, my dad was I didn't know how my dad would react, but I told my dad about this ayahuasca ceremony, and he's listening podcasts all day. So he was like, "Oh, that's awesome! Can I come out and try it too?" And he's like, "I got some stuff I want to work on," and that was kind of surprising to me. Well, not surprising because I know he listens to a lot of podcasts, but he was like super like grateful, enthusiastic, like good for you, that's awesome. And then my mom, on the other hand, she's just kind of like, oh, I don't understand, but I trust you. So she knows it's not drugs because I tell her all of this stuff, and she takes my word for it. But she hasn't really done any of her own like research on it. She just kind of takes my word for it.
Well put. And have you since done a ceremony with your father, or pushed him to participate?
Yeah, well, we did. We went to a ceremony, and it was Kambo and then ayahuasca. And
Mhm.
after the
Oh wow.
Kambo, he felt really sick all day. He drank the first cup of ayahuasca, and then the facilitators like burning a whole bunch of sage, and he hates sage, and he just had a headache, so he just went to sleep and just got away from the sage and went to sleep in another room. So he didn't. He did, but he didn't. So I'm gonna go
Hmm.
with my dad to Mexico pretty soon, and hopefully he'll get the experience that he's looking for, that he needs. So happy about that. And it's it's pretty cool the way it because they say even if you don't have the light show experience, Mother Ayahuasca is still with you after you drink the medicine. It opens up
Hmm.
a portal to you and the grandmother, whatever they say. Like I don't know. He had the first cup of ayahuasca and nothing happened, but he did start to get really curious about spirituality stuff, and now we're like always talking about ghost stories, and um, we're talking about like these deep conversations I've never had with my dad before, like what is God, what is energy, what is like duality and non-duality, how does we have these conversations about philosophy and all kinds of stuff that I never really talked about with him that much, but he's really interested. So it's been a good like bonding experience for my dad and I, that we had that ayahuasca ceremony together, even though he didn't have his ayahuasca experience. It's still like opened up this new type of like relationship we have, where we're like having deeper conversations, and we're interested in like more spiritual metaphysical stuff. And he's had like we had some psychics in our family on his side, and we talk about that and the psychic phenomenon and all kinds of cool stuff that we're just connecting on now.
Very beautiful. Well, Mike, thank you so much for sharing today. Any parting words for our what would you like to recommend to future first responders who watch this interview, who you've inspired and are curious, any direction you can point them, and yeah, why don't you
Yeah,
wrap
I
it up
think
for them
a
here?
lot of first responders that I talk to that are open to it, they still don't want to try it because there's kind of a misconception that, um, like, oh, I don't need it. I didn't have the same trauma that that guy had. Trauma's not relative like that. It's
Mhm.
everybody has their own experience, so you can't compare your trauma to someone else's. It just doesn't work like that. And the other thing, a lot of firefighters say that, oh, I don't want to try that because, or whatever reason they have. I guess the reason's irrelevant, but I think a lot of the time it's just a fear of going within that
Mhm.
kind of happens subconsciously. Like we don't want to we don't want to relive our trauma. That ayahuasca experience for me that I told you about was extremely uncomfortable, and I didn't want to relive and see that stuff again. But the the point is, we're firefighters. Like we run into freaking burning buildings when everybody else is running out. We're not afraid to do that. Why are we afraid of ourselves? So if that's what's holding you back, is regardless of what's holding you back, like ask yourself like really where it's coming from, I guess. Um, and if you just still don't feel called, then you don't have to. It's not on your path. I think the medicines really call you when it's something that you need. If you have an odd, unusual curiosity about this stuff and it's crossing your path and you feel like it's just something that interests you and something that you're curious about, maybe that's a calling and you can listen to that. It's not for everybody. Not everybody needs it or wants it, but I think a lot more people need healing than they realize.
Mhm.
There's a lot of firefighters, like I was one of them, like, oh, I'm fine. This stuff doesn't affect me. And then you come home from work and you get in a fight with your significant other, and then you drink a beer and you go to sleep. It's like if
Mhm.
you were really, if nothing bothered you, you probably wouldn't behave a lot of the ways that you do. So just like be curious about yourself, I guess, is the
Mhm.
message that I'm trying to say.
Thank you so much for getting vulnerable with me today. I really appreciate it.